to start, I think. Are you on mute there? It might not be you. Can you hear that noise? Can you? One sec. Cheers. All right, morning everybody. Welcome to the Corporate Governance and Audit Committee today. Thanks everybody for joining us. So we've got quite a busy agenda, so we'll start straight away. Membership of the committee. We've got 2 councillors as substitutes because we've got vacancies. So Councillor Sokol. Yeah, Councillor Bellamy.
Yeah, I'm subbing for Mel Stevenson, who is also no longer a councillor.
Thank you. And Councillor McCarthy tells me he's on his way. He's just a little bit late, so we'll start. Minutes of the previous meeting. Oh, sorry. Yes, Chris Jones, our co-op member, has sent apologies, and Councillor Turner has sent his apologies as ex officio cabinet member. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, minutes of the previous meeting. Any comments? Happy with those? Everybody happy? Okay, great. Declarations of interest. Anybody? Anything? No? Admission of the public. We're on the webcast. Public members, people can come. We've got one private reporter at the end, which if we need to discuss, we can take in. Item 17, we can take that in private if there's any bits to discuss on that one. Deputations and petitions.
None received, Chair.
Okay. And no public questions, no?
None received, Chair.
Okay. So item 7, I'll hand over to James for the audit risk assessment for Kirklees.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, everybody. So this is the first of the audit papers that we bring to committee, and just updates members on some of the processes, and asks for the committee to agree the risk assessment document, and for us to formally submit it to Grant Thornton. That's the appendix, the appended document. So it's a regular kind of annual report that we do, and it runs in the format of a series of questions that Grant Thornton ask management to consider and to respond to. So those topics cover, in a general sense, they go for general inquiries of management, fraud risk assessment, laws and regulations, the impact of laws and regulations, related parties, going concern, which is a relatively new one, accounting estimates, and some accounting estimates that are general inquiries of management. So that's kind of it. It's a suite of questions, and we've answered those questions. It's just to make members aware of the answers, so that you can have sight of them as they kind of pick some of the key areas up that they'll get looked at in the audit. So yes, it's over for any questions.
Okay, thanks, James. Any comments or questions on this item? You want to? Yep.
So, just a point really on page 6 of our papers anyway. It's page 16, I beg your pardon, of our papers. The first question about what key events and everything, and it says cost of living crisis, and I don't know if a cost of living crisis applies to a council. I mean, that's a bit of a pedantic thing. I just think you need to get those right. There is an inflationary pressures on the council, which were then outlined, weren't they? Rather than a cost of living. Councils don't have costs of living. I'm surprised nobody else has got anything to say. I've marked a few things in here, I think. On page 27, where we're talking about the impacts of regulations. Sorry, is there a problem? Okay. About the housing regulator had raised some concerns about related matters following the Building Safety Act, I suspect. So I think they were a bit more than some concerns. I just think that underplays what the issues were. And as far as risk assessment is, we need to get that accurate, I think. There were very considerable concerns, in fact, because the housing revenue account is having to spend a lot of money putting some of it right. So let's get that. Don't underplay stuff when there's an issue. So I hope that can be just adjusted. KSDL is obviously an issue which I'm pleased that I can't remember if it's in this section or a further section that the auditors are going to have a look at the assessment of the value assessment of the site. I think that to go in the accounts, I think that would be helpful to understand that. That's it on that, I think, on that risk assessment thing.
Okay. James, you've got your hand up.
It's a pleasure to pick up a couple of those comments. The cost of living one is perhaps more a reflection of the collection fund items. So obviously, which picks up business rates and council tax. So if there are pressures within the collection fund, which you would get if people are struggling to pay bills due to cost of living issues, then it does impact into general fund. So we raise it in that sense, really. So that's all that was picking up. And it's probably a generic term as well that felt more pertinent last year, but equally sort of is lingering on, isn't it, in terms of just inflationary impact and that wider tightening of the monetary sense that the council's seeing. In terms of the housing regulator one, I think it's probably I take your point on the wording of it. It does go through a process whereby Martin Durnley feeds in and Julie as well into that. So it's not an unreasonable point. I think it's about raising awareness of an issue here, and then obviously you've raised it now, and external audit can pick that up and have a look at it as part of their audit. So yeah, that's fine, that one. KSL, that's another one that's just lingering until we kind of understand the outcome. And I think we wrote off provided against some balances in the accounts last time, and it's almost just to reflect that that's still an ongoing issue, and until we get an outcome, we're in limbo in an accounting sense. So the outcome will give us the accounting answer and how it needs to be reflected in the statement of accounts. But yeah, that's it from me. I hope that's answered everything.
Gareth, you want to come in?
Thanks, Chair. It was just to, I guess, emphasise a couple of things. So, as James has said, this is a sort of standard list of questions that, as external auditors, we ask each year, and it's good that officers have completed this and brought it before the audit committee for discussion. I think a really good question raised by Councillor Pinnock there around the housing regulator point, and it was just really to reassure the committee that as an audit team we've already sort of raised that question with the council's valuers to see what, if any, impact those issues have on the valuation of those assets. So that's something that we will be looking at, throughout the summer and autumn as part of our audit work, and I'll maybe touch on that a bit more in the next item when we present the audit plan. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, just to pick up on that as well, I think Chris, who's our comment, who's not here, he did send some comments. I think one of them was he questioned about that housing regulator, and he did suggest whether that should have been referred to as one of the, I think it was on the first question around the key financial impacts, whether that should have been listed as potential impacts there as well. So I just thought I'd add that in as a point that he'd made. And also agree with the point about actually about cost of living crisis. I think it's become just a catch-all term, and it's kind of funny because we've got cost of living crisis, and then in brackets we've got actually what the specific reasons are
Yeah,
what
yeah.
we mean by cost of living crisis, and actually maybe we should just stick to those because
That was
I don't
my
think it's
point,
just
really.
something that's specific to this council. I think everybody's using that as a catch-all term to mean quite a lot of different things, so probably for specificity it's good to be clear on that. But yeah, thanks for those comments. Anything else before we move on? Okay, thanks everyone. Next item. So we're moving on to the item 8, the external audit plan. So, Gareth, back to you.
Thanks very much, Chair. So I'm conscious there's quite an action-packed agenda today, so I'll try and keep this relatively brief and take it as read in terms of the audit plan. And maybe just focus on page 45 in terms of some of the key messages, Chair. But this is the proposed audit plan for the 23-24 financial year, covering both our accounts audit responsibilities and those around the value for money arrangements review that are also a key part of our duties as the council's external auditor. In terms of the sort of significant risks in this audit plan, so those areas where there's the potential for a material misstatement in your 23-24 draft accounts, they're highlighted at the top of page 45. So the first one is around areas where there is the potential for management to manipulate the financial position. Not that we're saying they're doing that, but it's an implied risk across all audits, not just in terms of public sector or local government, whereby management could override the controls in place in terms of income, expenditure, recognition, and looking at areas such as the use of journals to post particular items. So that will be a continued area of focus. The next 3 bullet points are essentially those areas of your balance sheet that are significant in terms of value and also are susceptible to quite significant changes, depending on fairly minor changes in assumptions can have quite significant impacts on their valuation. So that's in terms of your share of the West Yorkshire Pension Fund balance, and also the valuation of your land and buildings, your council dwellings, and particularly those assets that have been badged as investment properties. So these are all, I'm sure those that have been on the audit committee for some time, that you'll be fairly familiar with these areas of focus, because there will have been those that were listed by our predecessors as the Grant Thornton external audit team in previous years. There's also a group audit where we'll be particularly focusing around the valuation of the Kirklees Stadium, KSDL, again consistent with previous years. Materiality, so again, members will be familiar, we don't audit things to the penny. We're required to provide reasonable assurance that your accounts are free from material misstatement. So our materiality at this moment in time is in line with what we used as part of last year's audit, so just over £16 million in terms of the materiality figure that we work to. But we do highlight in the ISA 260 report at the end of the audit any adjustments or errors or amendments that have been identified over our clearly trivial reporting threshold, which is set at just over £800,000. Along with the accounts audit, there's a requirement for us to give a commentary on your value for money arrangements. So building on the work that we did in the prior year and reported at the beginning of this calendar year, again, our focus will be on the areas that we highlighted in terms of key recommendations from the prior year, one of which was around the DSG overspend position and the accumulated deficit position. Again, from my experience, although Greg and I are new audit members for Kirklees audit, it's an issue we're familiar with across a number of our audit clients elsewhere in the region, and indeed is a significant issue across the country. And then also looking at the wider financial position of the council as well. Alongside those 2 key areas, we will do an overall review of your arrangements across the 3 key themes within the VFM work, which is around financial position, governance, and then your arrangements for economy, efficiency and effectiveness, effectively your, I guess, your performance management and your achievement against some of your key performance measures. Just in terms of logistics, we did you know, a good level of planning work, so thanks to the finance team for their engagement in that in March and April. So we're in a good position in terms of our audit planning. We revisit our work in July on receipt of the Council's draft accounts, and our audit is planned in to take place throughout the summer and the autumn, with a view that our ISA 260 report on the accounts will be issued in November, and we are aiming to conclude our accounts and VFM work by the end of this calendar year, consistent with previous years. The audit fee is a significant increase this year, but that is in line with the new PSAA contract. And again, members are probably familiar with the one of the expectations of that new PSAA central procurement contract was that audit fees were going to significantly increase on that, given the challenges within the external audit market for the public sector, and part of that was to make the fees more sustainable. So that's the reason for that significant increase that's shown there. So I'll pause at that point, Chair. Obviously, myself and Greg are new to the Council, but as we mentioned in previous committees, experienced across a number of similar metropolitan councils across the north. And our colleague, Sam, who will lead the sort of day-to-day audit, he's worked at on the Kirklees audit for a number of years, so there's that consistency at that level, if you like. But happy to take questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody got any questions, comments? Councillor Bennett, yeah.
I mean, first of all, I think I've said it probably last meeting as well, how good it is that the council gets its annual audit completed. I've probably got this figure wrong, but I think there's 10% of councils haven't had an audit done since about 10 years, something like that. And that's absolutely shocking, actually. And very few, and Kirklees is one of them, gets them done on time every year. And that is a huge credit to the council and the auditors. Because it is. So, especially given the challenging circumstances outlined in the introduction. So, when I was whizzing through, what did I pick out? Apart from KSDL, which I've referenced already. So on page 59, where we're doing the value for money stuff. There's two bits in there. I mean, we know that there's financial sustainability is inevitably an area of significant weakness. So you've put, you know, there's huge challenges there. But the issue of the DSG, I think, is a bit more interesting, because this isn't that. Presumably, this isn't the high need stuff. Oh, it is the high need stuff. Okay, right. So that's. Oh, I thought if it was, you'd have, you know, indicated that it was the high needs, because there is an issue among schools having deficit budgets as well. And I thought that's what that was bringing out. No? No.
Can you put your mic on?
At the DSG position overall, of which a significant proportion of the challenge is the high needs block. And as I mentioned in the intro, you know, there's a significant challenge here. I mean, we had a good meeting on this last week, Greg and I, with Rachel and other colleagues, sort of talking through the council's approach to get things back into a in-year balance. But should that take place, there's still a challenge here, and indeed a number of other authorities around the sort of cumulative deficit position. Now, at present, the government has got a statutory override on that DSG deficit until 26-27. If that statutory override isn't extended, then that is a big problem nationally. And because there are so many local authorities that are in a similar challenging position, it would be a courageous thing, shall we say, for any government, whoever wins in later this year, not to extend that statutory override. Now, it's all got to be settled at some point because it's sat there as effectively, I think it's, well over £1 billion across the country deficit. But it is a real issue. If that's a call on general reserves after 26-27, that will be a really big problem for local authorities. Oh, absolutely, Councillor. Yeah.
Councillor, you put your mic on.
Sorry. So that, I mean, that's really important then, that we, and presumably in your audit you will highlight that when you're, because, the impact on the council if the government doesn't, when we say override, just properly fund it. Let's, I mean, I just spell it out. Instead of override, just fund it, as it should be. Anyway.
I think, well, obviously, one argument would be that the funding has not kept pace with the legislation, and hence why, as I say, Kirklees are nowhere near on their own on this issue. It's a big issue across a number of our clients. When the old PSAA contract first started in 1819, one of my other clients was one of only 3 Grant Thornton local authorities that had a material DSG deficit position. Fast forward in 5 years, those that are not in a material deficit position are now in a minority. So that just shows you how that's changed over that 5-year period. The level of challenge around that high needs block position. So, our angle on this is very much, has the council got appropriate arrangements in place to deliver in terms of what it's committed to the DFE? And that is largely around trying to bring things back into balance in year with an expectation, I guess, from a national point of view that something will happen nationally in terms of the historic deficit positions here and elsewhere. So it absolutely will be a key part of our VFM work. I think just briefly touching back on Councillor Pinnock's original point around the timeliness of the accounts and VFM work here at Kirklees. Absolutely, Kirklees will have been in roughly about 10% of councils had their accounts signed by the end of last calendar year, and a similar proportion had their VFM concluded at that time. I think I mentioned at our first committee back in March that as a Yorkshire team, our audits, with one exception, were all delivered by the end of last calendar year, and our VFM work was done at that point. But that's not reflective of the GT position nationally, and even less so in terms of other audits out there. So, although it doesn't affect Kirklees, there's a huge consultation going on at the moment around, the level of audit backlogs. It was up at 900 sets of accounts that hadn't been signed off at the beginning of this year, and there's talk of putting a backstop or guillotine in to basically reset the system. But that has huge implications because there's a huge number of accounts there that are not going to be subject to any sort of audit, or certainly not a full audit. So, it's great that the council and the previous GT audit team have kept things on a timely basis here, and obviously Greg and I, coming into the audit for the first time, don't want that to slip under our watch either. So, we're absolutely committed to ensuring that timeliness of the accounts and VFM work is maintained here at Kirklees, and that's one of the pages in this plan later on that GT have sort of mandated sort of an escalation policy, section 16, page 68, because you know, a number of our clients across the country have, I suppose, not fully engaged in the audit process like you have here. So I was very much keen, which is why it's bold and underlined in the middle of that page, to say it's very much business as usual at Kirklees from our perspective, because, you know, we've had that good level of engagement and working together to make sure we got through the audit on a timely basis. So all this escalation to the chief exec, the audit chair, we're not anticipating needing to do here, because there's been a good relationship on both sides in the previous years. But that page there has, you know, has sort of been in all our audit plans, because there are a number of audit clients that have not engaged in the audit process as you have here at Kirklees. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. On the same page, actually, on page 59 or page 21 of your report on the value for money, under governance, you talk about the appointment of an additional appropriately qualified independent counsellor. I think you mean member rather than counsellor. But we have had one appointed. So I'm not sure whether there's still something outstanding here. I don't quite follow what the ask is, really.
I think that may have been, were you looking to bring in an additional one? Over and above? Yeah. So, again, I'd have to go back, because obviously that VFM report was issued by a predecessor, but I believe there was an expectation that there would be two.
I'll bring in Martin. I think my understanding is that the guidance out there says the guidance is to have two. Is that right, Martin?
Sorry, Chair, the guidance which the government hasn't really pursued does mention two now, yeah, that's right. It's the stuff that came from SITFA out of the Redmond report, but it's not an obligation, there's not an obligation to have independent members at all yet, even though it's been threatened. It was threatened when Kemi Burdenett was the assistant in the Department of DLUC, but it's not been pursued since. So that's the position, yeah, but exactly what has just been said, Chair, yeah.
I think... Yeah, and just to say on that, I think, because obviously we've got an independent member at the moment, he's provided some feedback to us as a council about the process of being an independent member that we can then learn from, and I'll be speaking to Martin and others about that. I think my feeling is it probably is a good idea to have two, just because if Chris decides he doesn't want to do it anymore, then we don't have any, we potentially don't have anybody, and it probably does help to have people that are, you know, learning as well as being part of the committee. So, but that's something we need to consider about how we'd go about that, and we'd have to want to have the right person as well, wouldn't we, rather than just any person. So, yeah. Yeah,
Mr Jones is on a 3-year appointment, though I think it might be extendable to a small amount. So getting a sort of position whereby you appoint somebody every year or two is ideal then, because you don't have a crossover. So, and it's best not to have independent members who are actually been here for a really, really, really long time. So it's about having a consistency that perhaps you can't necessarily get. I mean, notwithstanding the fact that a couple of our members have been on for quite a long time on this committee, it does at least give the consistency there. So, yeah.
And I think just on the DSG thing, I think I think we all understand what the situation is. I think it's just one of those things where when you've got a significant weakness called out and people look at that and say, well, that sounds really, really bad. And then when you look at it, you say, well, actually, what could the council do differently? And it's hard to know how you do something differently when, you know, it's about whether the finances come forward. But I mean, we appreciate that, you know, we have to have that, you know, that is what it is basically. But I think it's just one of those ones it's hard to explain, isn't it, to the, you know, to the wider public, what does that actually mean?
Yeah, I think I hear where you're coming from, Chair. I guess, you know, the direction of travel on DSG, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of more and more authorities becoming in more and more of a financially difficult position with it, I think it has started to, you know, ratchet up the leaderboard at DLUC, etc. And certainly all the conversations we as a firm have with DLUC are very much sort of highlighting this issue. Now, you know, there's a couple of options that, you know, may happen, you know, post-election. One is probably going to be around extending the statutory override, and then there's probably a separate conversation in terms of the actual funding mechanism behind it, because, you know, a number of authorities would absolutely argue, as you have, Chair, that, you know, our statutory responsibilities have gone like that, and the funding, you know, has probably, well, not kept pace with it, shall we say, Chair. So you know, I think this will have to be something that, you know, whichever political party is successful in the election sort of grasps that nettle at some point in the next Parliament, because it is, it has the potential, if that statutory override isn't extended and if additional funding isn't provided, to, well, potentially create a number of Section 114s across the country. Because as soon as that, you know, 20, 30, 40 million across a number of authorities as a call on the General Fund Reserve, that's going to be a huge problem.
Sorry, can I just ask whether, given the conversation that's gone on, whether it's appropriate to highlight that it's the high needs grant that's the problem within the DSG? Because I sort of partly misinterpreted it. So where you've got the shortfall in the DSG grant, you could put brackets high needs.
Yeah, we can probably, I mean, we'll pick up the typo point that was mentioned earlier, and we can maybe draw that out and reissue this post this meeting with that particular change updated or clarified around the high needs block position. That's fair comment.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Is there any further comments on this item? No? Okay, thanks a lot. So the next item is the proposed amendments to arrangements for the corporate parenting board. Joel, do you want to present this?
Yep. Morning, everyone. My name's Joel Hannah. I'm the Head of Service responsible for corporate parenting in children's services. And the paper outlines the work that's been going on really in earnest since November to redesign our corporate parenting arrangements and responsibilities to broaden a partnership, partly in response to some work we've been doing collaboratively with the DFE advisor who's visited Kirklees twice to undertake inquiry and audit and provided us feedback, and also through the work that we've been doing with some peer sector leaders as well around their arrangements. The last time, I think, or the corporate parenting arrangements in Kirklees were initiated 9 years ago. There's been some change in legislation since that time that impacts on the recommendations as well, bringing into light statutory responsibilities for local authorities in relation to corporate parenting principles that are set out within guidance, and really a move across the corporate parenting arrangements to broaden out from just specifically children's services responsibilities to whole council, but actually wider than that, whole communities and whole networks. We've had a number of events supported by partners and have already established some really clear partnerships with Huddersfield University, Kirklees College, and some notable third sector lead groups in the area who have all expressed a willingness to work with us and join that partnership board. So the revised terms of reference set out that partnership. I suppose most significantly is the arrangements that will include children and young people directly on the board. It's practice within a number of other authorities. It's recognised as good practice for one of the core principles for corporate parenting is to ensure that the voice and wishes, feelings and feedback to the local authority comes directly from children and young people. And we're working with our Care Leaver Forum, which are a group of young adults who have care experience from Kirklees, to support and join those arrangements. So other than that, I'll leave it for questions and comments.
Thank you. Thank you for the report. I only have one question stroke comment, really. I've looked at the variety of partners that we've got involved, and the one that jumps out to me as possibly being missing is mental health. So we've got physical health, but it doesn't appear that we've got mental health. And we know that through the pandemic that all children have had more challenges, and it's an area where there's a lot of pressure on the service. So I just think it's perhaps something, I don't know whether you're going to add it or not, but it's certainly something to reflect on and perhaps consider. Thank you, Chair.
Joel?
Yeah, it's absolutely recognised as a key area of work for our services, and through having the Integrated Care Board as commissioners, we'll be able to feed in the needs assessment and commission work on a strategic level. In terms of a delivery level, the membership list isn't viewed as closed, and we are working. The members that are listed down here are those that have already agreed to be part of and engage with the board. We are seeking mental health partners as well, and adult services.
Thanks. Any further? Yeah, Councillor Pinnock?
Seems appropriate changes. A couple of questions. One, does it have to go to the council for AGM, council for decision? Yeah, because it doesn't say that in the recommendation. Unless I've read it too quickly. Secondly, how does this corporate parenting board fit in with fostering and adoption panels? Because there will be some overlap somewhere. And who does the oversight of it? Is that in scrutiny or cabinet or where?
So in relation to how the corporate parenting arrangements fit with fostering panels and our work on fostering, the annual report provided by our fostering service goes to the corporate parenting board and would continue to do that. So there's a representative from our fostering association, the Kirklees Fostering Network, as a member of the board, and there's a direct link with fostering. It fits under one of the core priorities, which is around sufficiency, providing suitable and stable homes for children to grow up in, which of course includes fostering. So there's a direct link, and it drives that work. In relation to the second point of overseeing it, yes, the work that's overseen and driven by the board is overseen and called into children's scrutiny. That we also have an ambitions board within children's services, which includes members, and the performance is specifically scrutinised and looked at there. So in 3 places, performance of the outcomes, if you like, for services that are delivered, whether that be the number of foster carers, the statutory roles and responsibilities of social workers to children in care. They're scrutinised and overseen in the corporate parenting board, but also in children's scrutiny and within the ambitions board. Sorry, I should also add that there is a proposal within terms of reference that there'll be an annual report to full council of the work of the corporate parenting board as well.
Yeah, Julie.
Thanks for picking that up, Councillor Pinnock. In the report itself, it does say the next steps will be to refer it, but it should be in the recommendations as well. So I think that in terms of if you agree this moving forwards, we just need to make sure that the recommendation is clear that this committee is referring it to annual general meeting. And sorry, we should have picked that up earlier, but thank you for your eagle eye.
Yeah, so on that note then, we're looking to agree the recommendations with the addition that it does go to the full council for approval. Are we all happy with that in agreement? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So the next item 10, amendments to the contract procedure rules.
I think I'm doing this rather than Martin. So the report you'll probably notice is written by the head of procurement, but she's on leave at the moment. So Martin and I had a toss-up about who would present this. I'm assuming that you've read it. There's not much in it. There are very few amendments that are being proposed at the moment. I think we've been saying this for a number of years, that there will be a big review of the contract procedure rules once we get the new legislation in place. That we think will be in October. And so next year, we will hopefully have a much more comprehensive review of what the impact of that will be on the contract procedure rules for the council. But in the meantime, just a couple of small changes. They are on page 103 of the pack. It relates to the disposal of assets, and it's fairly straightforward. You can see it in track change, and it relates to the disposal of assets which are not land or buildings, and it clarifies a position. So in effect, it says that assets which are valued above £25,000, there are some exceptions to doing that by public notice or by an open tender process. So if somebody comes along and offers a significant sum of money to purchase something, so long as it's benchmarked and it goes through the approval of the head of procurement and the head of internal audit and risk, then we can dispose of it by that method. And it also clarifies about how we dispose of IT equipment. I don't think that's necessarily needed. I think it's actually something we should do anyway, to make it absolutely clear that when we do dispose of IT equipment, that it's wiped appropriately and there's nothing left from the encrypted assets. And then the appendix is updated to reflect the new UK regulation figures for thresholds for public contract regulation purposes, and those are at page 112, I think. And the recommendation is to agree them and to recommend them to annual council.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor?
Yeah, thanks. I think Julie's answered my question, to be honest. It was about the IT equipment. The way it's worded, it doesn't read that it's going to wipe the data. It doesn't actually say that. And when I read it, I thought, I'm not actually sure what it's telling me. But so long as that's what it means, I'm entirely satisfied. But it doesn't actually say that.
Well, it uses the words securely and safely.
Yeah, and that could mean anything.
It could. It could mean lots of things, but the first thing on the list with my CSIRO hat would be making sure that all evidence of anything that's on there is completely wiped.
And that's why I was asking the question. It just didn't jump out at you. That's what it meant. But if that's what it means, that's fine.
And is that, do we have a security policy? Is that covered under a different policy anyway?
Well, I think it sits within some of the CSIRO policies from the Information Governance Board, but given that the head of procurement and the head of audit and risk will be involved in some of those things as well, and oversight, I think that we can be reassured of it. If you think we need to be clearer, we can add some wording in to make that clear. I don't think it's necessary. I think that the IT team will be fully cognizant of the fact that it needs to be properly wiped. Off the top of my head, I don't know which policy it's in the IG policies, but it will be covered in that, I think.
Well, that's what I was thinking. That actually it's covered under other policies.
Yeah.
This is just a point towards. It's a consideration, but we do that anyway. Yeah, that's fine. So on that note, then, are we happy to recommend this to full council, AGM? Okay, thanks. So the next one, item 11, is the amendments to the financial procedure rules. Over that, yeah.
Yeah, that is me, Chair. Thank you very much. A couple of areas, again, it's a sort of fairly minor change, and I think every year we also reflect that we need to sort of make sure we rewrite these at some point to reflect the fact that almost all our transactions are conducted in a sort of electronic form now and not on pieces of paper that are signed off by other pieces of paper. And we need to do that at some point. But for the moment, this just concentrates on two areas one core area and one small adjustment. So the core area is about capital. We're not actually changing any of the limits that are contained, or we're not recommending you change any of the limits about what authority directors and cabinet have. But what we are suggesting is that we make the document a bit simpler to make it much clearer that every topic that is going to be covered by a proposed capital spend is covered off by a business case. It's been a little bit unclear in the past whether that was absolutely necessary, particularly in circumstances where Cabinet or Council had approved as part of the capital plan a named project. So if a named project was approved in the capital plan, Some officers and colleagues believe that it was legitimate to therefore progress that project without further governance processes. And what this does is says, no, you have to actually do a business case which has to be approved by Cabinet. So it's formalising that part of process. And it's also therefore making the document a bit simpler because it had lots of ifs or ors in there, and what is taken out is that, so that it's much clearer that that's the process. The second part is just some relatively small changes to the sections on grants, again to make clearer that whilst you may get a grant from West Yorkshire Combined Authority or a government for a capital project, that nevertheless, in order to get it incorporated into the capital plan and before you can execute that proposal grant award, you do need a business case. And so again, it's the same process restructured and re-emphasised so that is actually clear because it wasn't clear absolutely before. And as a subset to that, a formal restatement that if a grant condition is onerous, that should, as a minimum, be considered by the senior corporate governance officers, i.e. the Director of Illegal Governance Monitoring and the Chief Finance Officer, and if they're concerned that those are particularly onerous and they feel those need to be drawn to the Council's attention, or rather Cabinet's attention, that must go back to the Cabinet for an approval. That's particularly linked to the fact that grants from some third parties obligate the Council to continue providing services which are supported through the grant for long periods, and so it's important that people realise that that is an obligation and that is properly considered as part of that process. So those proposed changes, Chair. Happy to do questions or responses.
Thank you, Martin. Any comments on these ones? Questions? Everybody? Councillor Bennett?
I'm just really pleased it's spelling out the detail for capital plan investment. You know, that although it happens that prudential indicators and revenue support for capital will have to be spelt out for each project, as I read it. A programme or named project may only be progressed once the business cases have been approved and prudential indicators, etc., have been agreed. Because that wasn't, it was done, but wasn't always done.
Yes, correct. So what we're trying to do is to make sure they're done in absolutely every case. And our new Chief Finance Officer colleague might have particular views about how much he thinks that should be done, because sometimes it's been done really well and sometimes slightly less well.
Any further comments? No? Okay with that. So our recommendation is that we recommend this to Annual Council for approval. Is everyone happy with that? Well, it's advise council.
But what we do is refer the decision of this committee to council.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the council either accepts the referral or not.
Yeah.
Accepts the decision of the committee.
Do you agree with that? Yeah, it just says next steps approval.
We make a decision and then it's referred to council as a decision.
Yes, the role of Corporate Governance Audit Committee is to consider amendments to the Constitution and make recommendations to Council, yes. I think advise could be interpreted in a number of ways, but perhaps we could have made that clearer.
So, yeah, we've got a learning point to have consistent language in terms of...
We should, yeah.
What we're recommending and what our roles, yeah. Okay, but I think we're all in agreement to recommend that to...
Just use the standard wording,
Yeah.
and then we all know where we are. And then, given where the council is, I think you need to be clear.
Yes, agreed. Okay, but we're all happy with that. Thank you. Okay, item 12 is the amendments to the Council's Constitution. David?
No.
Oh, Julie. Okay.
Actually, since I'm sitting here. And I'm pleased to say that this does have the appropriate recommendation in it. You don't need to pick that up, hopefully. Okay. So this is the fourth report, actually, that's going to go amending the Constitution to the Annual Council on the 22nd of May. This is the one that picks up all the rest of the changes. It's one that we're required to do on an annual basis. So if we don't make changes throughout the year, we need to do something which goes to council, which sets out amendments. This sets out some amendments in the body of the report. It also, in the appendices, sets out amendments that have been made throughout the year as a result of decisions made by council and other committees during the year, and some minor amendments which I have in my delegation. So some of the really obvious ones are the changes made as a result of changing the planning committee system and the terms of reference on there. But those are set out briefly at Appendix 1. Some of the changes in here are, well, they're a mixture of things. They are things which clarify what we do already, and I think are fairly straightforward. Some of them are here for discussion with some amendments or suggestions about how we manage meetings moving forwards. Just before we, I'm assuming you've read it all and you'll have questions, so rather than going through it, I'm assuming people will ask those questions. Can I just clarify, this came out when we were looking at this and briefing the chair, which is at paragraph 2.07 2, presentation of petitions. It looks like a maximum isn't. It says we're suggesting a change here to clarify how long someone might have to present a petition. It is to suggest that there's a maximum of 1 minute, but the words "a maximum" isn't underlined, so it looks like that's already in the council procedure rule. It isn't. The council procedure rule reads, when a petition is received at a council meeting, that no discussion shall take place on the item. So I'm really sorry about that. I just wanted to clarify that, because I'm sure if you've read it, you'll think, well, actually, what was the maximum before? There wasn't a maximum before. Okay, thanks. That's all I wanted to say. I think some of these amendments are for discussion. Some of them came from our new Chief Executive, who has experience on some of these things, particularly around questions at his previous authority.
So I think, I don't know, Steve, do you want to say something now or before we start?
Yeah, I'll just say something on the written questions, if that's okay, Chair. So particularly, I think it's the item that's 2.12, and it relates to public questions and member questions. I mean, I have not made any changes or suggested any changes and thought I wanted to observe it all in action, first of all, for several council meetings. This change, or debate for change, if you like, is just to try and make the process a little bit easier and a little bit more transparent. So you get the questions out in the public domain, we get the responses, the initial responses, out in the public domain. It doesn't stop challenging the executive at the right moment in full council. We're not proposing to try and alter any of that kind of stuff. It just gives the opportunity for a more transparent process and a more transparent answers, rather than hidden away in minutes or on a video that people can't. It's there, clear, it's in advance. And in particular, we did have a circumstance earlier this year where a member of the public wasn't able to get to a meeting, and you know, we managed to get through it by the skin of our teeth, shall we say. That shouldn't be the case. A member of the public should be able to have their question heard, or a question seen at least visibly, whether they're at the meeting or not. The advantage of being at the meeting for the member of the public or the member is that you can do the supplementary, which is obviously without notice or without writing kind of stuff. So they're my observation. I've not got any political backing for this at the moment. They are my observations, and they're for debate for both here and hopefully at full council. So that they're not backed by any particular group or not. I just wanted to make that clear. They're kind of my independent reflection on the process. And from working in a different process that makes it a bit more quicker, and potentially, might I say, particularly at full council, might mean that you have more chance to getting onto some of the items later on the agenda without the Chair of Council having to bomb through the agenda.
Thank you, Steve. So what I'll do is I'll open up for comments and questions, and then if there's any particular changes that we want to, look to go through those individually or whatever, then we can do that. Councillor Taylor, you had your hand up earlier.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, just to say the flood risk management change moved from overview and scrutiny management to the relevant scrutiny panel I'm fully supportive of, so I think we just park that one out of the way, because that's a separate issue, isn't it? I just want to precede my questions and comments with just an observation. I think it was last summer, it might be in the summer before even, I spent a fair amount of time as one of the party that was looking at the governance processes, about whether we move from a leader in cabinet to a committee system, or we stayed with the strong leader in cabinet. And we determined and was approved by this committee and subsequently full council to stick with the system we had. But what came out from that, and what we saw cross-party agreement on, was to improve transparency, improve openness, and what we found that actually either model could work, but where either model was seen to work in other councils was where there was that openness and that willingness to listen, that willingness to be challenged and questioned. And what I don't want to see this council moving towards is a position where we're perhaps trying to move away from giving members adequate opportunities to do that questioning, challenging and seeking that transparency. My first question on the written questions, I'm seeking clarity on whether this is just for full council or this is an attempt to introduce written questions for cabinet, because currently as a non-member of cabinet or an opposition member, I'm able to go to cabinet and ask oral questions. I think that's really important that we retain that ability to question the executive, because we don't get that many opportunities to question the executive. If you start saying that at cabinet you've got to put in written questions, that feels wrong, and I would not be supportive of that. If this is just about the existing process for written questions to council, I'm comfortable with it. I do have a couple of other questions. On 2.08, we're proposing to change CPR 9A. And my question is why we're changing it from saying the representative will be permitted by, where is it? Yeah.
You mean 9A?
Well, the first wording underlined may be permitted, whereas previously it was will be permitted. So that suggests that there could be a situation where they're not being permitted, but it doesn't clarify who would be stopping them and why we would. I don't understand why we're changing that. So I'd seek clarity on, it's just that one word, but that one word in itself suggests a change. So that's my first comment. My second point again, under, what section am I in now? 2.14, 6. When an answer to a written question has been given, the member who asked it, if they're in attendance, and with consent of the chair, may ask a supplementary. Why are we saying it has to be with the consent of the chair? Surely there is a right to ask a supplementary. In what circumstances would they not be allowed to ask a supplementary? I don't understand that. So I'd ask clarity on why we're bringing in the ability for the chair to refuse to allow a supplementary. Similarly, on the same section under 7, it clarifies that, we may not allow a supplementary if it's of a personal nature, etc., defamatory. I have no problem with that. But again, it doesn't clarify who would determine whether that question is deemed to be defamatory, offensive, frivolous or whatever. And I think we need to have clarity on who has the authority to make those decisions. Under 2.15, it's suggesting that speaking rights for councillors at committees will be removed and only be allowed at the discretion of the chair. I fundamentally do not agree with that. Currently, if as a member I attend a committee of which I'm not a member, I'm permitted to speak on items on the agenda. Given my earlier comments about the openness, transparency and the willingness to accept criticism, this sounds like an attempt to shut down members. And I do not support this, and I don't understand why anybody's proposing that. And then just seeking clarity on 37, permission to speak for members of the public. I don't understand why, if they presented a deputation, the chair or mayor couldn't, at their discretion, allow them to speak later. Because it's at the discretion of the chair or member. So I don't understand why we say, because you brought a deputation, you're not allowed to speak. I just don't see the logic in that. So if I could possibly ask for some clarity on those points, if that's okay. Hopefully there's not too many points to pick up.
Well, there was quite a few points. Just quickly before we go, I think what you said, lost the point a bit now, but I think on 9A where you said it should be will rather than may, I think that sounds sensible to me. Otherwise it's just, yeah, it should be specific, shouldn't it? So I think we should agree to suggest that.
Did it get changed from may to will?
Yeah.
Just to clarify, I think that this has gone in because it's subject to validation. If you're proposing it subject to validation, it will be permitted. Then
I think that's right, because I think
Yes.
it's not the intention, but it just gives the impression that
Yes.
you can. But actually, if we just
Yes.
decide that we don't want to, then you do. And I don't think that's what we're intending, is it? But I think yes, if we could, I think that would be better.
Okay.
But do you want to answer the other points?
Well, I think that I can see the chief executive, and I'll pick up the other points that you don't pick up. Yes.
That's absolutely
Okay.
fine. So if I just do them in the order I wrote them down, I just think is the order that John mentioned them. I think it's 2:12. Which one is it? The bit about the questions and, closing down debate. I can only give you the value of my experience. Actually, because you are opening it up that a question can be asked even if you're not at the meeting, it actually increases the volume of questions. It doesn't decrease the volume of questions. It increases the volume of questions. At the moment, a member or a member of the public can only get their question on record if they're at the meeting. So they can't, if a member has got a really burning issue and isn't able to get to the meeting, their question doesn't get heard. Or a member of the public for that matter. So that's that one.
Can I just come back on that? My question isn't about that, Steve. My question was, this is about written questions. I don't have a problem with written questions if we are not removing the right of councillors to ask oral questions at Cabinet as we currently have.
But so the way that I've worked this in the previous is you have a block for questions, a block for written questions and public questions, and that's where they feed into. I think it's a separate point on the individual agenda items. That's the 215 item. So the question bit at council and at cabinet, and for that matter at other meetings, although scrutiny meetings are slightly different, aren't they? But you have a section of the agenda specifically for written questions on council, on cabinet, etc. And clearly on council there's a section of the agenda which is about holding the executive account. That's fully without notice, etc. You don't have the same section in cabinet as it is. There is only a questions section. That doesn't stop, of course, if you've got a question on the individual item, the chair inviting that in. So if I just cover that one before I do the others, all we're saying, the only difference here in the word, and I'm sorry if the wording feels a bit stronger, is removing the automatic right. It's removing the automatic right. And as I have observed in this council, custom and practice works really well. Custom and practice works really well, that the chair, when there's a meaningful debate going on, be leisure, be care rooms, be whatever you want to call it, we've talked about over the last 7 months that I've been here, the chair often invites those debates coming forward to widen the discussion in that bit. It's just removing it as an automatic right proposal. 214.6.
Sorry, can we deal with them one at a time and
So-
get clarity and understanding?
Just because I want to get clarity as well, so on the questions point, I pick up John's point. So basically, at the moment at full council, you have written questions and you have oral questions. And what we're proposing is to change the procedure for written questions, and I think that we understand that. At Cabinet, I'm just looking at the last agenda for Cabinet, it says questions in brackets oral. So I think the question, if I understand it, is saying, are we suggesting that we change the Constitution so that at Cabinet it's only written questions, currently it's oral, or are we saying that oral questions would still be an agenda item, or or what? And I think that's the bit that maybe you're trying to clarify, Councillor Dale, which I think is an important point, because that's quite a different change, isn't it, to just changing the way that we currently do written items.
The way I'm only observing how I've done this previously and changed it previously, was that there are only written questions at Cabinet. Remember at the moment, the problem that you see is it can be on anything. It can be on anything. And that is the difficulty at Cabinet. It can be on anything, not just on items on the agenda. It is still free for questions on anything to come forward at that Cabinet. Many places, not just split or one colour or another, many places only have it on items on the agenda. We're not proposing to change any of that, so you can still do your written questions on anything that are coming forward. The proposal is that there wouldn't be an oral section separately, but clearly you could, if you got to that item and you wanted to raise an issue or a question or a clarification, you would be able to do it on that item at the discretion of the chair.
Just on that point, I don't know whether anybody can add just on the current constitution, because just looking at the agenda for Cabinet, it does say oral questions currently. So, yes.
But if you're not at the meeting, you don't get to ask a question, whether you're oral or not.
I just think, just being clear, I think there's a difference between where you currently have a written questions item and changing the way that works, to currently have an oral and changing to written questions. I'm not saying one's right or wrong, I just think it's important.
I think the difficulty for me, Chair, it's the without notice that causes the problems, because you get lots of questions without notice. The quality of the debate is far less because you're not able to have a meaningful discussion about that information, so you're not getting the right quality of debate. And quite often, we sometimes get questions into us saying, what was the question again? What were they asking? Because the person that's asking the question, quite often a member, could be public to be fair, knows quite a lot about that matter and dives straight into the detail without actually an introduction or a whatever. So I think it's just trying to tackle that side of it. Look, I'm trying to give you an open free-for-all here. This is not a political one side or the other. This is just a benefit of experience that can make the situation work better. Can I just pick up the point that Councillor Taylor mentioned around...
Sorry, Chair, can we close... This
is the same issue.
Close it down.
This is the same issue, John. It's the same issue. You asked whether the proposal was for all meetings or just council or cabinet. To be brutally honest, I hadn't thought about that. I was just assuming all meetings. But if you wanted to be more specific in that, maybe that's one way you could go. I hadn't really, it's a good question, John, because I hadn't really thought just cabinet or just council. I'd kind of just thought all meetings. But if you want to be a bit more specific and put those in as options maybe for council debate at council, that might be a good suggestion.
So just to be utterly and totally clear, I am not supportive of anything that would remove the right from councillors to attend Cabinet and ask an oral question. That's an important part of our ability to hold the Cabinet members' feet to the fire. If they're all written questions, it's actually officers who are answering us, not the Cabinet member, because they're getting answers written for them by officers. That's not what I want. I want to have that ability and to retain that ability. It is part of the role of opposition members to hold the executive to account. And we need to be able to do that. And that is by not giving them notice of what we're going to ask them. And it makes cabinet members be on top of their briefs. And if they're not on top of their briefs, they will become, they will, sort of be less effective and will be found out. So I am not supportive of any change that removes the right for us to ask oral questions at Cabinet. And I'm being very specific there about Cabinet, because that's what we do today. And I think that is an important part of the way Kirklees works and the Kirklees culture. I'm sorry, Steve, I disagree with you. I wouldn't be supportive of what you're proposing.
And you're entitled to disagree clearly, Councillor Taylor. I can only benefit from the experience that it doesn't. You may say that, you may believe that, but it doesn't remove the need to be on your game because you're on it with the supplementaries and etc. So you may believe that, but that isn't the case in 2 councils that I've worked in.
Okay. So, yeah, go on, Councillor Pinnock.
Just thought it might be useful to have another voice. What worries me a bit about this is that they're quite significant changes, and as far as I know, not been discussed across the political sphere, which would have been helpful, I think, to have people have time to look at it and come up with some proposals, because it has to come through this committee before it goes to the annual meeting for any changes. So, there's a few of us here, but not everybody, who may have different views from the ones we're expressing. So I think that's a bit disappointing, really. On the, there's the 2 big aspects, aren't there? The petitions and then the written questions. So let's take the petitions first. I mean, some of that is right, to be specific about handing in a petition and all that. And I agree, I highlighted the maybe, so I'm glad that says no will. One of the issues that has cropped up before is, this business, if you've got more than 3,000 signatures, that there is a within the CPR to have a debate. Now, in the past, petitions that my colleagues or myself have handed in, we've had to push for this debate, and it's been months after the petition's been handed in, and I don't think that's acceptable. I would quite like something in there that stipulates it has to be within. It's probably the easiest way of putting it. The debate, with more than 3,000 names, the debate has to come to council within so many meetings of the cycle, I guess, something like that. So one that I think Andrew handed in November, with definitely more than 3,000 names on it. Nothing heard yet. So, and that is very frustrating. So, so if there can be a change to that, I'd be welcome. What on the deputations, I would have thought being able to give an audio or visual presentation is a positive. As long as it had been handed in beforehand, so that you can look to see that there's nothing there that shouldn't be there, just helps and enhances the ability of deputations to come and speak. If it's about I don't know, quite often have them about green spaces or something. It'd be quite useful to have a slide showing the green space they're talking about, for instance. So I'm not sure why that is being. So perhaps as you can tell me why that's not a good idea. So that's on that section. Then on the written stuff, I've quickly looked at the Constitution. CPR 11 does apply to all council and all cabinet and all committees. So, and I can see what the chief exec's trying to do, but I think we need to perhaps distinguish between council and cabinet and committees. Having a written answer ready at I think, and having them published is excellent. That's a good improvement. I think it will mean that written answers must not be more than one side of A4, because sometimes they've been 3 sides of A4, and you just think, well, you know, so let's better discipline on that rather than anything in here. You know, don't, for crying out loud, give us the whole caboodle. So, you know, I think that's a positive. And I think, you know, being able to ask a supplementary as a result of the written answer, it should help inform the debate better. So I think that's good, you know, because people can read it rather than having to hear and pick up what's being said. So that's good. Again, I say I'm not completely happy about the oral. Presumably, it's not. I mean, this isn't changing oral questions to council. Presumably, that's going to still be there. Hasn't taken that out. Well, we have the slot in council for written questions and oral questions. No, oral questions.
Holding executive to account.
No, it doesn't affect that. Yeah. So. Yeah. Yeah. Would be published the day before, and then there would be opportunities to ask a supplementary question. So in reality, the half an hour would be for supplementary questions, which is good. Better use of the time. No, I think that's. I think that's okay, and it doesn't affect oral questions. Now, it also applies to cabinet and so on. Now, this is controversial. I'm agreeing with the Chief Exec. I think it's right that oral questions at Cabinet should only be on items on the agenda. And I'm amazed it isn't. Because that's what it always used to be. I don't know how that slipped. Because you can't expect Cabinet members to answer detailed questions that might crop up. Oral questions that might crop up at the last minute. Written questions, fair dues. Get them done and supplementaries. But oral questions, I think that's... I mean, say questions to, as we have on the agenda, to our chair here, and we ask him a detailed oral question about the audit. I mean, would that be fair? Probably not. So I think that's... I'm personally been probably around too long, really. But that's how it always used to be, is all I'm going to say. That was always the accepted convention, that it was on items that are on the agenda. I'll stop there.
I suppose the point is, if you ask an oral question which is very detailed, then the answer you're probably going to get is, we'll have to get back to you on that because... Yeah,
but then that's pointless then,
exactly.
Isn't it?
So
you're just making a point then. Is that where we are? Don't make a point. Don't, So the other bit that I think we need to understand a bit better is where it says, subject to mayor or the chair's discretion. And some mayors will be very good and some won't. Because you won't get consistency is all I'm saying, I suppose is what I'm saying to that. And then that always causes problems. So,
I mean, so I think, before we start to summarise on some of the key points, does anyone want to come in? Okay, Councillor McCarthy.
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple points on some of the more minor issues. I think, just to follow on from what Councillor Pinnock said about slides and audio presentations, I don't think it should be normally permissible or good. However, there may be circumstances and perhaps there's like a visual you need to show or pictures or something. It might be permissible, and maybe that should be at the discretion of the chair, depending upon the circumstances. There was another thing as well on 213 about supplementary questions and answers will be recorded as part of the webcast and held in the public webcast facility for a period of 12 months. Does that mean that we delete webcasts after 12 months? I mean, I'm not sure how they're currently recorded. I mean, I don't quite know why that's in there. And then it was also, just to clarify as well, we're also proposing removing, I can find it, the total amount of time at full council for written questions was 30 minutes. Now, there wouldn't be any restriction on that. It was just an observation that if I was thinking about when I read this, and also the Chief Executive sort of confirmed it, if we go for this process, actually you'll get more questions. That will probably mean you'll get more oral questions in one sense, because more people will ask supplementary questions. So one way of looking at that would be, actually it's not so much a restriction, but another way of looking at it would be, you could get a deluge of written questions where cabinet members have a very short amount of time to, write responses to them, and then get asked even more questions at full council. So it was just a bit of caution that this might not exactly work in the way that it's intended. So yeah, just those points, Chair.
Yeah.
Things. I just wanted to say to Councillor Pinnock on this should have been fair debate. I totally agree. It should have been fair debate. We had the election right in the middle of this, and I'm not normally used to meetings in between the election and before AGM, so I think that caught me out a little bit, to be fair, and hence why the agenda for this was published on the day of the election, so we had to rush this a little bit. But I did speak to the leader. John, I gave you a bit of a heads up at a meeting last week, and David. But of course, those other leaders were busy elsewhere on that meeting. That's fair enough, to be fair. And I agree, we should have had a longer time to debate. And there are other things that we might want to do in the fullness of time that we've just put off for now, and we'll wait till the new monitoring officer gets here and have a proper longer term debate, etc. Because our constitution is considerably longer and more complicated than many other authorities. So there might be other things that we sort out in the fullness of time, or at least bring to you for proposals. It's a good point you raise about the 30 minutes. I don't think I'd clocked that might cause it to be longer. And I'm sure we can all think of certain times of the year when that may well be the case, if everybody and Uncle Tom Cobley and all's bringing forward questions and politicians are, etc. So, I mean, I honestly believe doing this written question proposal at full council will save time. But if we're nervous about it, if you're nervous about it, you could put the 30 minutes back in and we'll review it for a year and see how it goes. If it's causing a problem and it's lasting 35 minutes or whatever, then we can get rid of it. I'll let Julie come on the petition stuff, because I'm not sure that's my area of expertise. And I think the compromise that you seem to be coming to as a committee, I could live with, which is the written question stuff at council and the oral question stuff at cabinet is just on things that are on the agenda. That feels like a reasonable compromise to go into that split. But maybe it's not a compromise, or it's just a suggestion.
Julie, you wanted to come back on some of these points?
So I'm conscious that I think we haven't necessarily picked up all of the responses to some of the questions. So I've been making some notes. I'm going to endeavour. So I think we spent a lot of time talking about the written questions and then supplementaries. And I think probably it's a good idea we go through everything so we've got a very clear idea about what we're doing. But can I just pick up some things that people have asked questions about already? I think particularly John, Councillor Taylor, you raised a couple of things I've scribbled down here that I thought it might be helpful to clarify. So just in terms of, and in fact actually Councillor McCarthy, if I look at the issue around videos and slides, I think that one of the issues we have is that we sometimes get asked to do them very late in the day, and we don't have time to properly check those, and it's problematic if we then have to kind of put it on the system. So that's one of the reasons why this is what we do at the moment. But if people are keen to encourage that, then maybe we would need to put some restrictions around time periods for doing that, because it's really, we get requests very much at the last minute to do it, which is why we've said no in the past. Okay, so if there's a will to do that, we will look at it, but we can do that when we go through each of the points, perhaps. Okay, the issue about the webcast being saved for 12 months, I think that's what we do at the moment. I think you can go back and get a copy of it if you request it, but if you go on the website as a member of the public, you only see it for a period of, okay, you think it's slightly different, okay.
Sorry, Julie, I've just checked. I think that we used to have a different software system
Okay.
where we did keep it for 12 months. Because it's a YouTube channel,
We can do it on
in
YouTube.
theory, they're all there. I think it's good practice to have a retention policy, just purely from a data protection perspective. So I think this is a suggestion around a retention policy, but obviously that's up for debate in terms of views on that. So at the moment, we've not deleted anything that's on our YouTube channel.
Okay, all right. Okay, so that responds, I think, hopefully. Just in terms of the discretion of 3 minutes, actually that's already in the it's already in the council procedure rules. It's just been moved from when the written questions are asked orally at council under the current rules. There's a limit to 3 minutes. No, okay. So that's the reason why we've moved it across to a limit of three minutes for supplementary questions. 3 minutes is a really long time. It's a really long time. And actually, most questions aren't that long. So I don't think that's necessarily problematic, but I'm just trying to sort of explain why that's the case. I think we've talked about the issue of member speaking rights. We've discussed that. The issue that you asked Councillor Taylor about who defines what's defamatory, vexatious, frivolous, etc. The whole of this isn't set out in here, but it cross-refers to another part of the council procedure rules, and the decision is taken by whoever the chair is, which might be the mayor, in consultation with the chief executive. So it's something which is repeated in various places in the council procedure rules. So there's a way of doing that. And then the attendance by members of the public and the issue around speaking rights of people who have presented a deputation. I think that it's already the case that they don't have a speaking right. I think it's just clarified the drafting on it, actually. And that's just my observation.
So,
and I think, actually, in reality, some people who have attended deputations have asked questions, but that was when we had oral questions as opposed to written questions at council, certainly, in my experience.
just on a couple of points then, so I think we need to start going through these, but in terms of petitions, I think just to, and I don't know how we draft it, I think there is something in there, isn't there, about, well, if you put forward a petition, that will be debated. Well, I would assume that would be at the next possible meeting, but it's obviously not. So is there should there be something in there? Because I think that would also play to the point around the consultations. So just because there happens to be a consultation going on a particular month, presumably, just because it should then be heard at the next possible time, rather. Do you know what I mean?
Chair,
I need something that explains that, because it just seemed a little bit.
I think we might need to take that away and have a think about it, because sometimes there are petitions presented in the middle of a statutory consultation, and therefore you're having a debate that could predetermine a decision that the consultation hasn't completed. And sometimes consultations take quite a long time, particularly the big stuff. So I don't disagree with the ethos. I guess I just would want a bit of clarity on what we do on statutory consultations.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think it's just that the way that it's worded at the moment, you could take it as if there's a consultation on at the moment, well, then that never gets debated. Whereas I think what we're trying to say is that it needs to be at an appropriate time, but also when you do submit a petition, is there a timescale at which that should then, and I know there's things to do like verifying the signatures and things like that, and you might think you've got 3,000 signatures and actually you've only got 1,000, or whatever it might be. Go on, Julie.
I'm not sure that we've ever had a situation where we've had 3,000 signatures which have been verified, which hasn't led to a debate at some point in time. I'm not aware of the one that Councillor Andrew Pinnock submitted and what it related to. Pardon?
The town hall.
Okay, I wasn't aware of that. I mean, I think that where 3,000 signatures are received and they are verified because they're people who live or have businesses in Kirklees, it will lead to a debate. I think the issue is the timing of it potentially.
I have to push it, sorry.
Okay, okay.
I can't remember, I think it was one on the Spen Valley pool, I can't remember. And it's going back several years. But I did have to say, you know, the procedure rule says this, when are we going to have the debate? Because it's,
So I think maybe that...
so it needs, something needs to be clarified in there, in my view.
Is it on petitions?
Chair,
Okay, look,
there are three areas that we've just been talking about where I'm going to suggest that we don't make changes today. We know that we're going to do a bigger piece on looking at the Constitution, bring something back later in the year. And just, you know, the issue around the retention policy, the issue around usage of media with deputations or petitions, and this bit about how quickly a petition with 3,000 signatures should come back to council, are probably things that we're picking up today saying, well, perhaps we need a bit more debate about this. So I'm proposing that we, for those three, we say, let's include them in this review we do of the Constitution that we're going to bring back later in the year, rather than try and rush something through today that we probably haven't had the broad enough discussion about. I personally would like to throw into that the debate about oral questions at Cabinet, because I think that needs a discussion with a wider range of people than just the people here today. But the written questions piece, around written questions going to council, I think we can all be comfortable with, and is something that we should be able to take forward from here through to full council. And I just make that as a proposal.
I think you're doing my job for me. I think we're going to get to this around having the debate. So let's like you said, there's basically three things that are maybe a little bit there's been some debate on. So what I was going to say about the petitions is we've got something there which I think is what's proposed is actually broadly quite similar to what it is today. I think all perhaps I would suggest is that we say, you know, a petition organiser will be permitted to present the petition at a future council meeting within a reasonable time period, subject to the debate. And then we can have a debate in the future as whether that should be mandated to be at within 6 months or within what time period at a later date. But I think it does just need to be clear that you can do a petition and that will happen subject to you meeting those criteria. And it shouldn't be a case that in 2 years' time someone's going, well, I never got a debate on my petition, and that should be able to be held to account. So would that be okay, Julie?
So you're suggesting that we put in within a reasonable time period?
I think so, and then I think that covers off any question around the... I know we've got the bit around the if a consultation's ongoing as well. And then I think we can then at a later date have a wider discussion as well, should that be in a particular time period. But I think it's right, we need more time to discuss that in detail, because I don't know, you know, what the limitations are to what is taking that time, and I think we shouldn't make decisions without understanding, you know, we don't want to give ourselves a timescale that can never be met. Would everybody be okay with that proposal? Okay?
Okay.
In terms of the written questions, I just want to be 100% clear on this. I think my takeaway from this is that we agree that at full council, that proposal for written questions is sensible. I think it should still have a time limit of 30 minutes on those questions, so that we have, you know, we have 30 minutes for the supplementary questions, and I think that would be correct. I think at Cabinet, I think I also think that for members of the public, that is also a good thing to do, because it gives members of the public the opportunity to write a written question, they get a proper response, they can still ask a supplementary question, and they can still ask that question even if they can't come to the meeting for whatever reason. So I think that sounds sensible. I think for Cabinet, what I see on the agenda at the moment is we have oral questions, and I think I'd be reluctant to change that without the further debate and discussion that we've just suggested. So I feel like we should leave that. Go on, Councillor Taylor.
You've just started talking about the public written questions, and I'm still a little nervous about that. we do periodically get issues that arise that has pressure groups that are quite passionate about it. We could get inundated with written public questions. If they don't have to attend Cabinet to ask it, you can get very similar questions coming in from 30, 40 people, and then we've got officer time being taken up to write answers to all of these questions. So I'm just a little nervous about that.
Yep.
You will see a spike, and then it drops off. And then there'll be spikes throughout the year. Could I be blunt? Normally, prior to an election, when a new candidate wants to introduce themselves to the electorate, that's normally when you see a spike. I agree with Councillor Taylor, that might happen. You'll see a spike early doors on key issues, on key things that are going around. My experience is when that drops off over time. Maybe you could put a time limit on it. So you could say 30 minutes. The only thing is, obviously, we've got to do all the responses. But for me, I think this is a journey rather than an infinite. So I think where we'll end up is we'll make some changes, and then hopefully they'll speak for themselves. So you could go a bit further on next time around, maybe.
Sorry, it's not about the time limit. If they don't have to attend Cabinet, they can just, 300 people can submit questions, written questions. They don't have to turn up and ask them.
There is also, and sorry, I forgot to mention this, of course, the other response, and this is really important for the public, if they're asking lots of questions on things that we already publish in the public domain, the response is, here's it on the website. So quite often, I take your point about lobbying groups and all that, but if it is important to the public, then we should know about it. It should be in the public domain. So I'm not as worried as maybe you are, John, because I've seen this in operation. I've seen it come in and spike a little bit and then drop back, apart from key times of the year. But I'm also quite keen that the public do see more of the issues that we are tackling and get questions on. And all you do, don't you, get questions and comments and complaints about the councils, that they actually see a bit more of that, if that is what the public are asking.
Yeah. I'm in agreement with that. I think that, the other thing to say is that I think, this is a recommendation for the AGM. So full council might be more concerned about the points you've raised, John. But I do think, fundamentally, it sounds like the right thing that someone should be able to ask a question and get a proper written response. It does seem reasonable to me, but I appreciate the point you've made. Yep.
And if it is such a problem, we'll mop it up in the September review.
Well, I think it's worth. We're not going to know until we do it, are we? What the outcome's going to be.
I just think at the moment you've got proposals around car parking charges. We've got proposals around libraries. Both of those are, in the communities that are impacted, are having a significant impact. I can see us being flooded with written questions about those issues, and I can see the appetite for certain councillors to actively encourage that. And we may just be flooded out. And every time there is a similar issue that comes up, you're going to get exactly the same response. And I just think, I'm not sure how that's adding to anything.
Councillor Hussain?
Thank you. I would just suggest that maybe we should do a trial period, and I think that will be able for us to see how the new changes work, rather than assuming they're not going to work in the first instance, and then review it and then take it from there.
So if I agree to maybe by the end of the year, once our new monitor officers joined us and we look at other stuff, I'll bring a report back on how that's gone and where the question you were asking there, John, about resource time and how much time and effort it's taking to go through those things. I do think I know I'm causing officers work. It is important, though, if the public are that upset about big issues, that we see it a lot, because sometimes maybe consultations get hidden away and sometimes individual views on issues get hidden away and we don't see it until the final result comes out. You do in your patches, but the wider public don't necessarily see all that. So, but it is a risk, so I'll come back on that in terms of whether it's been a big resource issue or not.
Councillor Bennett, you want to?
I've got a wider issue about the decision we make today goes to full council on the 22nd. and the rest of the council, other 60 members, won't have seen it really and had a chance to think about it. And I just wonder how that's going to work.
Well, I'll generate something through group leaders. Now, well, as soon as you get all through your AGMs, I'll get through to the group leader discussions to try and generate a bit. But that is a fair what happens anyway, isn't it? And that's the problem we've got with this timing. I hear what you're saying, Councillor Pinnock, but
If it were me, given the composition, new composition of the council, it may be better to just put some of the less controversial stuff forward and then see how we get on.
I mean, I think there is, you know, without, you know, what who might say, but I think it could be quite a difficult item to deal with at the full council because there might be people, you know, people like you say might have different views on different elements of it, which might make it more difficult to manage and amendments to be suggested and so on. So it's something to consider. But go on then.
I think I'm of the same mind. We are intending to bring something back in the autumn. I think it makes more sense to give that a bit more time on some of these issues to bring it back then. If we weren't doing anything until next May, yes, I can see a reason to try and cram in what we can. But I think, you know, given some of this, I think it just gives us more opportunity to just reflect that. It also gives us a chance to, as you both have made clear, you know, the new composition of the council is slightly different, and it gives us an opportunity to understand how that's working in practice as well.
could I make a recommendation? If it helps the committee, just do the written stuff for council and we'll bring the other stuff back for cabinet next time. You know, that might make it easier to get through full council.
And
bear in mind, Chair, you're going to have to present at full council.
yeah. Well, I think if we do that, it does give us the opportunity also to see how it works, which is useful. Councillor Sokol?
Yes, Chair, I'm listening to everyone. I'm a little bit concerned about that when our Chief Executive earlier said everything will be done in a rush, yeah, because you were going through election time. I know that Chief Executive and there wasn't much out input from on the other side leaders or cross party. I don't know how to publicly any question on the why this item have been brought in a rush, so we will get criticized. So I don't know where we stand. I think we need to review it again if we go it to committee or council now at the AGM. So we need to put some time limit on when it will be a review, either in September, October, or end of the year. Thank you.
So I think then on the questions, I think where we're landing is that we'd be happy to recommend making the change to written questions to full council. We've considered potential further changes to questions to cabinet and other committees and how that might change, but we want to reflect on that and have a proper discussion across groups and a little bit more detail before we kind of suggest that to the council. Just on the bit around the ability to speak at meetings, I don't know if we've covered that off. Did people have any comments on that? Because obviously,
yeah, this is 2.15, and I don't agree with the change personally.
I mean, because from my perspective, I can see the reason why that's being put forward. But my concern is just on the same note as what we've just discussed, is that likely to be something that the full council is really going to want to adopt?
Let's put it on the to be reviewed list, Chair.
I think that might be sensible. Does everybody agree with that? Because I think there's definitely an argument to be had around you don't want to have situations where, say, at a cabinet meeting, members can just sort of filibuster progress. But I think the way that it may present is that it's not been fully kind of discussed with all members, and I think there's something in that, but we don't want to.
Just on that, Chair, also going back to my initial comments about the work that we did looking at the governance models, one of the recommendations from that was to try and encourage more members to come and speak at scrutiny committee meetings. This would mean they might not be able to. And it kind of goes fully against what that intention was to increase the backbench member involvement. This kind of says, well, only if we want to let you, which feels like the wrong message to be sending out, to be fair.
Yeah. Councillor McCarthy.
It was just maybe a sort of stupid question, really, but on 215, I mean, I'm happy to defer this, but it does seem like it's more sort of reflecting current practice anyway, because, you know, whenever I've spoken at another committee I'm not a member of, you know, that has been, although I've not been stopped, it's been at the discretion of, like, which bit I speak at and so on, as to how long I speak and so on. So it was just a comment, really, is I think I'm less concerned about 215 because it seems to reflect more practice, really, rather than actually the rules.
Yeah, and I think this is... Go on, so yeah.
I think Councillor Taylor's picked up the point, which we will defer this for later debate, but I think there's a difference between scrutiny and cabinet. I think there's... I think
that's what we need to look at, because I think, you know, if somebody comes to a scrutiny map because they've got... it affects their ward, it would be crazy to say, oh, sorry, you can't contribute. But I think there is something in there around saying, you know, if somebody's had, you know, 5 opportunities to speak at cabinet and on items, and then, you know, should they just be able to keep, you know, should 69 members be able to turn up at cabinet and all speak for 5 minutes on the same issue? That might not be appropriate. So I think we just need to, we probably need to look at how it might impact the different committees. Just a couple of other quick ones. Just on the thing about the retention period for the webcast and stuff. I just wonder whether it needs to be that specific, or whether it could just say they'll be retained for a reasonable length of time, because I'm not sure it needs to say 12 months or, but, you know. So, in terms of all the other items then, I'm just looking at what we've been through. So in terms of CPR 9 on the petitions, are we happy to progress just with the minor changes that we've suggested, and then we'll review any further detail later on? May to will, and just saying that, adding something about being a reasonable time period. That would be, I think. Oh yes, the flood risk. We're happy with the flood risk. Sorry, I forgot about that one. Oh, Julie, sorry, your microphone.
Sorry, apologies. So we assume that the flood risk is okay, because one of the things we've got to do today and on Monday is summarise this and be very clear what we're putting forward to annual council on the 22nd. So thank you.
So we agree on that one. We're okay to recommend the small changes on the petitions. I think in terms of the CPR 10, about the videos or audio presentations, I think we're saying that we're okay with that, but we think there should be some discretion, potentially, but what we don't want to do is cause problems.
Okay, so perhaps one option we could look at is it's the discretion of the chair, but also it has to be submitted within a reasonable time period to enable that to happen.
I'd agree. Yeah.
Because that would tie in with the discretion. So,
Chair, and just to back Julie up on this one, we still get some people saying, "Well, I don't have to tell you what I'm saying," you know. So I think we do have to follow a bit of a. And I know it's surprising that, but we do get that. We do get that quite a bit. I just want to come and present.
It's only the presentations bit that's up to being suggested. Change. John.
That was one of the ones I said maybe we should do in the autumn, just so that we can be really clear. Because if we're doing the Constitution, we want to be clear about what we're writing into the Constitution. And we're kind of like trying to... Reasonable time isn't really very specific, and who defines reasonable, and then you're going to get people kicking off reasonable. It's better if we end up saying has to be produced, X number of days in advance of the meeting or something like that. But that needs a bit of a debate, so I think that's one better really leaving as is, and we pick it up when we do the next review of the Constitution in the autumn.
Councillor McCarthy? Yeah.
I mean, I'm happy to have this go to review as well, but I was just going to suggest they have to submit any slides at the same time as they submit the deputation prior to the meeting. That would make sense. It gives the same amount of time to review it as the actual content of the deputation.
I mean, I think that's a sensible, because I think the point is this is happening already today. So we're trying to make it clear for people when they're putting in a deputation that they can point them to what it actually says in the Constitution, rather than them thinking we're making it up as you know, basically.
Yeah, because this represents current practice, which is we don't allow audio or video presentations. It's people coming. We look at we now get the written deputations in advance, so we can look at them and make sure that there's nothing in there which is a hostage to fortune. If we were to allow video or audio presentations, we would do them at the same time. But at the moment, we don't, because it's complex. So if are we saying we want to keep the wording in because that's what we do at the moment and then debate it later, or just leave it out and say we'll debate this later?
On that basis, then I think if we leave it out, because I think from what I'm picking up, we're minded to say that we should be allow them to do that, and if you think that needs further discussion of how we make that happen, then I think we need to leave that out then.
Okay, so in our proposal we'll say actually we're going to leave that out and we'll discuss it later on, so it's not going to be the subject of a discussion at annual general meeting. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say on the point of the video access and reasonable time. In terms of that, is that specifically for council meetings, because that is a public meeting, and I'm just wondering how that would align with FOI requests and things.
Yeah, I think we need to leave that out for now.
Yeah.
We'll leave as is for now, and then discuss what a reasonable time actually is for those. I think CPR 9, so is it CPR 11, which is just Cleven 1, which is just clarifying about you can be a resident or somebody operating a business, I think is obvious. I think we should we should recommend that. 11.6 and 11.6, I think, I don't know what needs to happen with these stuff to resolve.
We'll just apply it to the written part question of full council.
Yeah, okay.
Put the rest on the to be debated later.
Okay. Sarah, we'll remove the bit about the 12 months for now. And the speaking permissions as well, we'll remove that and come back to that later. Is that clear enough for what we need? Is the recommendation clear enough to everybody who needs to write that down? Yeah. We're happy enough. Okay. So as a committee, based on all those recommendations we've gone through, is everybody happy? Are we in unanimous agreement on those points then? Yeah. Fantastic. Okay. Thank you. Do people need a 5-minute, get a drink or something? You toilet, 5 minutes before we move on to the audit report, is that okay? Okay. thanks everyone, welcome back. Just before we move on, I rushed ahead a little bit. So we agreed the recommendations that we wanted to. Just also on that last item 12, it just asks us also to note the changes to the Constitution that had already been made in the Appendix 1, and also that we keep it under review throughout the year. So I think we all agree that, but it's just to note that that was the that's also part of the recommendation. Okay. So item 13, we're on to the Internal Audit Annual Report. Martin, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So this is, well, three items from me now that arguably are in the wrong order, but I'm sure if you've read the agenda, you'll be able to bring all this into your cognizance, and we can have the debate in the order that they're shown in the agenda. So the first report is the Internal Audit Annual Report. So I'm required under the Global Internal Audit Standards and Public Sector Internal Audit Standards to produce an Internal Audit Annual Report and to offer you an opinion, or my opinion, about the Council's business corporate governance, risk and financial system controls in the year ended 23-24. So I've presented to you some information in the form of a report, which hopefully provides some evidence and information about what we have been up to, and this is basically a summary of the 4 reports that we've produced during the year, which are summarised out in section 3 of my report. A summary of the table, the green and yellow chart, which effectively is the chart which we've been working to and which everyone's told me is too complicated, but actually in the end hopefully you can now sort of work out what it was meant to show you, which is essentially a picture of how the organisation's assurances exist, and those bars are proportionate to the effectively the findings of our work. However, because the work is not done in equal proportions, the fact that you've got a yellow bar across is all a reflection of a single audit. So it's not perfect, but it at least gives some degree of information about where the levels of risk and assurance can be achieved, exist in the organisation, and where the assurance comes from. It's probably also worth just reminding ourselves that there's nothing red on there, which is a really positive outcome. And that the core financial systems are all green. So that is also an area of some degree of satisfaction. I think it's also worth reminding you again, I know that it's in the report and we've talked about it a number of times, that the school position has deteriorated from previous years, but because of the fact that we changed the criteria under which schools are reported, and partway through last year, it's true to say, so that schools which have a budget deficit which is not being addressed and is going on for more than a year will always get a negative assurance, irrespective of how good the general financial procedures within the school are. And I think there is a recognition by colleagues in the learning service, which I'll come back to later when we talk about the audit, about progress on the audit plan for 24-25, that there is a need for schools to become more cognizant of the issue of falling budgets and as a consequence of falling roles, or falling roles as a consequence of which have a consequence of falling budgets, and managing within that resource. So that's why that is orange. It would have been less orange than in previous years. It would have been less orange in previous years. Other information contained within the report is essentially a list about the things that we've also been up to. And all these things help also for us to reach conclusions, or for me to reach conclusions when I'm giving you advice. I think I have to remind you though that you know that the internal audit activity is relatively limited. You know that an awful lot of it goes into schools in terms of numbers of pieces of work, and therefore that everything I say to you is caveated on that basis, that it's on the basis of the work that we've done, and also the basis of personal knowledge that I acquire through other things that I get involved in the council, which you all know about, such as risk management and on the occasional project, that I reach a conclusion to tell you about where I believe the organisation is in terms of governance, risk management and financial control. So overall, we did have a 63% positive assurance rate, which is slightly lower than it has been in previous years, but I've just given you some of the reasons why that is because of the change in the schools. It historically used to be rather more around 80%, so that has got a little bit worse recently. And also the fact that when we have done follow-ups, they themselves have often also acquired negative assurances. We are proposing that from next year we change the way in which we do follow-ups to be more proactive, but not necessarily to provide opinions on that. So you will get an opinion. You will get the opinion next year. Will be much closer to in-year assessment of findings. We'll also be making certain other changes to try to make some of that other reporting a little bit simpler, because I think you've quite reasonably suggested that that what we're trying to do in some of the reporting, the coloured charts and things, were a bit too complicated, too many things going on. So, within all those criteria and caveats, I am able to say to you that I believe the organisation does have a sound arrangements for governance, for risk management and financial control, but with some caveats that are listed out in the report, and also a reflection of the fact that there are quite a lot of negative or limited assurance opinions, but those themselves also only pertain often to one area of activity. So a whole activity has been subject to audit, but only some parts have got negative assurance in them or limited assurance in them. So you would still you can get limited assurance by nature of having one fundamental problem identified or a number of substantial issues identified, but that doesn't mean to say that everything about a system is bad. It just means that some elements of it have elements of risk to it, to which I am obliged to draw to your attention. So that's where I consider we are, Chair. There are some appendices which essentially set out where we are against various forms of assessment. I haven't redone an internal assessment of my view of how internal audit is performing against global audit standards this year, for two reasons. One, because the standards are going to change, and two, because I didn't feel that it would necessarily bring any great benefit beyond the position that we had from the outcomes from the external review, which we had just over a year ago. So that is that particular part of outcome. And then the other one, which is a legacy of concerns about how me or I individually spend my time. I continue, therefore, to give you a list of the things that or the way that I spend my time. That having been said, some of the general advice areas may be argued to be not all pure audit, but they nevertheless inform me about what the organisation is doing. So that's it. That's all I wanted to say. So I'm able to give you a positive assurance outcome, but with some caveats about being sure that you all understand the extent to which that assurance is absolute. It's not absolute. It's only based on what I and my team have been able to do. And I'll await questions, Chair.
Thank you, Martin. Questions? Councillor Taylor?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Martin. Only one question. But firstly, sort of compliment you and your team on the work that you've done. And also, it is very pleasing to see a chart that doesn't have red on it, isn't it? So long may that continue. My only question is you talk about the sign-off of grant claims and that some of these regimes are difficult to comply with. Is that just that the strings that come attached to these grants are overly complicated and therefore difficult to demonstrate that we've ticked all of the relevant boxes? Is that what you mean by that?
Well, without wanting to criticise the principal funding party of the council in public, Chair, some of that are about WICA's internal processes and what they expect us to do and what they expect me to sign off. And I'm not necessarily happy about signing off things about budget projections that have been included into WICA's documents, and then they expect me to sign off. So I'm saying back to them things like, I'll sign off the spend the council has committed, which is what you really wanted me to do, and not sign off some kind of much wider budget management regime, which is a result of a WICA choice, which includes not actually being able to amend things which are known to be wrong on budget projections. I think it's fair to say the council has made a lot of progress in trying to make sure that those are corrected so that WICA is sent the right information. But the fact that they were asking me to give an opinion about where I thought our spending was going was not really on, so I've refused to do that. So that's one of the observations. Plus, it is very hard to, because of the way we do some of our accounting records, it's quite hard to make positive assertions to WICA as well, because of issues around accruals and things like that, which wouldn't typically appear in a commitment to what we've spent. So, no, it's not about not compliant with the regime per se, because we are spending, you know, I'm happy to sign off that we are spending grants on the things that we are telling WICA we are spending it on. So, you know, if they've given us money for something, or a government department has given us money for something, I'm happy to say that those have been complied with. It's more when we move into the downside of exactly where those numbers are and what they're expecting me to say.
Yep, Councillor
Minnick. Thanks very much, Martin, for this. Two things, really, I think. One is, can you help us by understanding how much internal audit this council does as compared with others? Because I picked up from your comments that there is, and you've said it before, that there's been a pressure on the amount that the internal audit is able to undertake because of funding pressures and all the rest of it. So that would be worth knowing, because we need to feel that we have an assurance that we're doing enough internal audit. And the second thing really is, I take your point about limited assurance, that we can read more into it than that nomenclature says. However, a creeping increase in limited assurance should sort of give us a bit of a warning bell. You know, it means, but I don't know quite what it means, whether there's an overall pressure in different services that they haven't enough capacity to fulfill all the requirements, or whether it means standards are slipping, or what it means. But I think we ought to be a bit concerned about an increase in that outcome of your audit.
So, answering the questions in the order, yes, I agree. We need to find out what is going on in other regional authorities, and we haven't got that information yet, but we are trying to obtain it. There are always caveats about that, as I've mentioned previously, about, you know, this authority's got housing revenue account, this one doesn't, for example, and this authority, in general, a bigger an organisation is, and we are quite a big organisation, you actually need to do slightly less internal audit proportionate to your activity volumes, but nevertheless it's a valid area, so we need to understand that. The second thing is, I think my answer will be to ease, yes, I think you should be somewhat concerned, but equally I think you have also answered your own observation, really, that we also have to be cognizant that if the organisation is under greater management pressure for people to make things like identify savings, that sometimes the only way you can do that is to actually not quite cut corners, but not necessarily do things in absolutely the thoroughest way that it might have been done in the past. And sometimes that might therefore cause an issue whereby you do incur a negative outcome from internal audit work. That having been said, I think there is a commitment from management or senior colleagues to make sure that directors and heads of service focus particularly on significant and fundamental recommendations, more so, to the extent that they've asked us to start doing some kind of monitoring and reporting back through the strategic directorate management teams and ELT about progress against those. So I think the consequence of that would be that there would be an expectation that, that directors or heads of service who aren't making appropriate progress are held more openly to account by management. And then we've discussed previously here the issue about the extent to which you should also be bringing people who are recalcitrant in that area to visit you and offer their explanations. So hopefully those things can be tied together in a way which is sort of logically structured to try to at least make sure that all the core areas of risk and concern are being addressed ongoing. I think there has been a little bit of a reluctance is maybe a wrong word, but it's not necessarily been seen as a priority. And I think there are some areas of operations, and they're set out in the reports which you have in front of you, which have repeatedly got negative assurances, and where the organisation needs to be aware that these areas remain some of concern. And so let's see how the new regime works. I think my colleagues are quite keen that we go back through all the historical or 1 year of this year's substantial and fundamental assurances, putting those on a list and asking heads of service and directors to explain which they've implemented and which they haven't, and then we'll start that process going. That's hence linked back into my comment about the fact that we have had a lot of follow-up audits that have produced negative assurances again. Now, the change in this process would mean that we will actually be doing less follow-up audits, which I think I think it had become too much of an industry in itself, and it was taking too long. My staff were spending too much time doing it. What we're wanting to do is to try to move to something where we don't actually have to do those follow-ups, or that when we do those follow-ups, they're done by management colleagues, me and my two team leaders, rather than by the staff who were often spending 5 days redoing an audit and finding, to my mind, we might as well say to the director, have you actually implemented any of this? And if the answer is honestly no, then it's, well, what are you going to do about it? And ultimately for you to invite them here to have a chat, if that's what you think is necessary, rather than us just going through the process of producing yet another report. What we have typically found on the ones that are getting follow-up assurances on the second or third visit is they have done something, but some of the most important parts haven't been dealt with. So it's not that people are completely ignoring things. And it takes us back to the line which I have always given to heads of service and directors. Don't agree to implement something you don't want to do. Tell us why you can't do it, and we will have a debate at that particular point about what alternatives, if there are alternatives, or whether it's actually really important for the organisation to deal with something. So a lot of this is coming back on individuals for their own willingness to go along with what we might have first accepted, even if their heart wasn't in it. So as long as people get an understanding of what that regime is, that should be a positive.
Gareth, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of points and observations from my perspective, from an external audit point of view. I think this committee needs to monitor a particular part of Martin's report on page 158 of the pack, paragraph 6.2. There's reference, and I know we discussed this quite a bit at the last committee, but Martin's there saying there is just sufficient assurance to demonstrate a system, and talking around the capacity point. So, that's something this committee needs to keep in mind. If the head of internal audit is making that point, and I suppose linked to that, and what we discussed at the last meeting is where resources are challenging, are they being focused on the riskiest areas of the council? And I know there was a lot of debate about that last time, but I think particularly when Martin's saying that in his head of internal audit opinion, that there's just sufficient assurance to give that view, I think that's something this committee needs to be mindful of. The second point, I suppose, picking up Councillor Pinnock's point on limited assurance, for me, I'm sure Martin will have a view here, I think whilst the rising trend of limited assurance reports should be something that the council is mindful of. Sometimes a limited assurance report, from my perspective, is not necessarily a bad thing, because management presumably have formed a view that something's not quite right in their particular area or service and want internal audit to come in, and they may well come in, issue a number of key recommendations and give an overall limited assurance report, but ultimately in the medium to long term, that service should benefit from that particular internal audit review. So I think I sometimes draw a distinction, I guess, between you know, certain core areas of the council, you know, the financial controls, things like that. If they were getting consistently limited assurance opinions, then I think that is a concern. But if on the basis that, you know, the audits have got to be risk-based and management may have a particular concern in their particular area, and internal audit effectively confirm that that's an area that's got weaknesses and needs to improve, again, you could argue that that's internal audit being used in the highest risk areas of the council to, in the medium to long term, to generate improvements, if you follow my drift. So I think it's right to be mindful of that increasing trend, but in the medium to long term, if it's in areas where, you know, there is an issue and medium to long term could generate improvements, that's not necessarily a bad thing from my perspective, Chair. So those would be my 2 points. Thank you.
No, thanks for that. And yeah, just following on from the discussion, I think what we've discussed in the past, haven't we, as a committee, and I think you touched on it, Martin, so, you know, where we've got findings from audits, we've got actions in place, are they actually being delivered? And if they're not, why are they not? And if it's significant, what assurance, who's coming to this committee to give us, explain why that's not happening, because that's what we need to understand. Like you say, if we're setting actions which should be improving the situation, why is the findings of the audit going the other way? It's working that out. And I think, as we also discussed around, you know, the areas that, you know, we have, it sounds like from, I know we're getting onto the plan later, but we have some areas that are actively sort of asking, you know, auditors, we want to make sure we're doing things well, you know, coming auditors, whereas maybe we're also not getting that off some, and we need to obviously think about that, as we've said, in terms of resourcing and things, don't we? So, okay, so anything on the, further on the annual report before we move on? No? Okay, with that, to note that report from Martin. Okay, thanks, Martin. So do you want to go on to the audit plan now?
Yes, so the audit plan report, at the last meeting you asked me to split this down between quarters, which is what we have done in the appendices. So quarter one is shown as 1 and quarter 2 is shown as 2, etc. And we also took the opportunity to do it for the proposed draft plan, which you've still got to reapprove. You've got to approve for the latter part of the year. I've started conversations with our colleagues in Learning and Children's Services about the issue about resourcing going into schools or schools auditing. And I suppose in part it links into some of the things that have just been said, because of course our Children's Services colleagues are directing us to go to schools which have got deficits, possibly because they want to another part of the council to, for want of a better word, remind the schools of their obligations to balance their budgets. So it's part of that same idea and that same regime. Those schools are getting unsatisfactory because they're not doing something which the organisation wants to do, and I think it's meant as a reminder to the governors that they have to make their budgets balance. So same idea and in repetition. I'll come back further when I've reached the conclusion. I get the feeling that there is a willingness that Learning are keen that we continue to have a regime of school auditing because of the way in which the rest of the council's control environment for schools operates, but they will accept that we maybe concentrate on those which they perceive are the highest risk, which are those with the biggest deficits. Surprise, surprise. But again, we also have to avoid a situation where we ignore schools where everything looks fine, because that may mean that their admin has got a bit poor, even if their budgets are balancing. So that's the position with regard to the things that were asked for last time. And then the other thing that I need to remember to bring back at some point is the issue about the benchmarking comparators to other organisations, which we'll try to do over the next few months, and I'll bring back.
So any comments or questions on this? Councillor Still?
Just an observation, and to thank Martin for picking up that issue around the replacement system in housing and neighbourhoods and housing these days, or housing and neighbourhoods, whichever way around it is. K&H, as I know it. So thank you for picking that up.
Okay, thank you. So we're happy with the plan, Martin. We're all agreed that we know that. Okay. And then the quarterly report, we'll do the public first, and then if there's any.
Yes, so final report is the quarter. This is a report about the 28 pieces which are finished in the final quarter. So as usual, we did rather more pieces, or we completed off rather more pieces in the final quarter than we had been managing through the year. So we managed about 80 pieces through the year, but we did about a third of them during that last quarter, or just over a third of them. During that period, it was there were 17 that were adequate assurance and 11 which were limited assurance, which is again broadly consistent with the averages throughout the year. And the report sets out those areas where there were positive and negative assurances. I think it's an opportunity for colleagues, and I've already mentioned one or two of the areas where there are limited assurances, and both of these, temporary accommodation procurement, for example, and the emergency duties, are follow-ups that have been round a couple of times already. So hence my comments earlier. I think care phones also had been subject to an earlier review as well. There are one or two newer areas with limited assurance on them. A lot of limited assurance issues arising in the leaving care about the way in which basically the financial controls were being operated. Some much more minor ones on areas such as parks income, which was really about an application of the charging regime for 23-24, which was where the invoices were issued before the charges were put up, so it was difficult to implement last year. But this year they have done it the right way around and set the new charges to match with or to send the invoices out based on the charges that are proposed for 24/5 rather than issuing invoices in 23/4. We're still using the charging regime for 22/3. So, and then the report also contains information about a number of about work we've done with colleagues in homes and neighbourhoods on areas like fire safety, reporting, and data governance. Which is sort of linked into the issues that have led to the regulatory investigation, and we're obviously putting more time, as we've already discussed, into assisting housing with that, or housing and neighbourhoods with their work to satisfy themselves about the fact that things may be getting a little better. And then the report also sets out other information about other investigations and pieces of work we've done in the period. At the end is some reporting on counter-fraud work. I think we are making positive progress with in relation to various aspects of tenancy and right to buy fraud with colleagues in housing who are upping their regimes in relation to trying to be sure that we haven't got an excessive amount, or we are able to detect and address attempts by individuals to obtain council houses in council houses under right to buy where they are not entitled to them, and also to try to restrict the extent of forbid subletting, but it's quite hard to detect, and I think the detection regime has perhaps been not as strong as it could have been, but colleagues are making strides to improve that with our support.
Comments, Councillor Taylor?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Martin. Just a question, really, or observation. On the follow-up audits, the emergency duty one, we've got 5 significant outstanding recommendations, and your opinion kind of suggests that progress isn't being made, perhaps, as we would have hoped. I'm just wondering, is this one of the areas that perhaps we should ask for an update from the service to this committee? Because I think it's useful to do that occasionally, just to remind people that there is that, you know, sort of position to say we as a committee are not satisfied the progress has been made at pace. It also has an impact on the wider council, doesn't it, when we do that occasionally? So that's just a suggestion, Chair.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a, yeah, that's a reasonable suggestion. Do people agree with that? I think we agree with that.
Yes, Chair. Are you wanting a written representation, or do you want an individual to come and explain things to you?
I think we should ask them to attend.
I think that would be, yeah, I think that's probably the...
Yep, fine.
Because then we'll probably say, well, please can they then attend, so do it one shot. Yep. Have a hand up on this? No? Okay. So we're happy with the quarterly report. So we've got a private pending, so we will move to a private session if everyone's in agreement on that, and then we can just cover off anything that's in that report. So we can end the webcast. So goodbye to anybody watching.